The European Commission has published 10 new guidance documents for CBAM implementation during the definitive period. They were published on the 14th August 2026 and are designed to help non-EU operators understand how the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism works from 2026 onwards. The guidance covers core CBAM concepts, implementation, emissions calculations, free allocation adjustments and sector-specific requirements. So what has actually been published? And what should businesses be reviewing now? Let's break it down. The first 4 documents deal with the main technical elements of CBAM. Guidance number 1 introduces the key CBAM concepts. Guidance number 2 is a quick guide for non-EU operators on CBAM implementation. Guidance number 3 covers the methods used to calculate embedded emissions in goods. And guidance number 4 explains the calculation of the free allocation adjustment used to determine the number of CBAM certificates to be surrendered. Together, these documents provide a framework for understanding the mechanics behind CBAM compliance during the definitive period. The remaining 6 documents are sector-specific. They cover cement, hydrogen, fertilizers, iron and steel, aluminium, and electricity. This is important because CBAM requirements are not identical across every sector. The European Commission's guidance provides sector-specific information on how the rules apply to the production and emissions associated with these goods. For companies supplying CBAM-covered goods into the EU, understanding the relevant production route and emissions methodology is therefore an important part of preparing accurate CBAM data. So what does this mean for a non-EU producer? One of the practical issues is data. CBAM reporting depends on information about the emissions embedded in covered goods. The new guidance explains how emissions are calculated and provides sector-specific information that can help installation operators understand what data needs to be considered. For example, the sector guidance addresses production processes, system boundaries, and the treatment of emissions relevant to particular CBAM goods. That means companies should not treat CBAM simply as a customs declaration exercise. The information needed for CBAM can originate much earlier in the supply chain, at the production installation itself. There is also an important point for EU importers. Although these 10 documents are aimed at non-EU operators, the information they contain can affect the quality of the emissions data available to the EU side of the transaction. Importers working with overseas suppliers may therefore want to check whether their suppliers understand the relevant CBAM methodology and can provide the necessary information. This is particularly relevant for sectors such as iron and steel, aluminium, cement and fertilizers, where production processes can determine how embedded emissions are calculated. And businesses should distinguish this new operator guidance from the Commission's separate guidance specifically aimed at importers of goods into the EU. So there are 5 practical checks businesses can make now. First, identify which CBAM sector applies to your products. Second, check whether your overseas suppliers understand the latest emissions methodology. Third, review how production and emissions data are collected and retained. Fourth, check that the information supplied to your customs and CBAM teams is consistent. And fifth, make sure your compliance procedures distinguish between customs information and the additional emissions information required for CBAM. The Commission's new guidance does not replace the legislation. The guidance itself states that it is explanatory and not legally binding, and that the underlying EU legal provisions take precedence. The key point is simple. The EU has now provided a much more detailed set of guidance materials for the CBAM definitive period. For businesses, the next step is not simply reading the documents. It is checking whether your products, suppliers, emissions data, and internal processes are aligned with the applicable requirements. For more practical customs and trade compliance updates, subscribe to Ask the Customs Manager.